Hey, good morning. This is Richard Hsu, host of Hsu Untied. This morning, I'm really thrilled and honored to have with me as my guest the legendary John Romero, video game publisher of numerous games, but most famously well known for being the co-creator of Doom. John, welcome to the program.
Hey Richard, how you doing? Thanks a lot for having me on here. I'm really honored and excited to talk to you.
Well, that's great. So, John, my first question is, you're obviously a video game producer. That's probably the highest and best use of your time. You've created such incredible, legendary games. Why did you decide to write this book? I mean, tell me, the Doom guy, what made you decide that you wanted to write a book and do this?
I think, Masters of Doom was a book that came out in 2003. It's been 20 years, and it really did cover a lot of the hot part of my career. Um, the thing about Doom Guy is it covers my whole life. It covers from when I was born all the way to today. Whereas Masters of Doom started in like when I was 12 and went until 2003,
Hmm.
right? So
Hmm.
it's kind of a narrow view, but it's like a lot of cool stuff happened then. But it's also told from someone else's point of view and not mine.
Hmm.
So it was written by another author, and he did interviews with a lot of other people to write the book. He
Hmm.
did some interviews with me, but
Hmm.
most of it was 100 people that he interviewed for that
Hmm.
book. So this is my way of kind of like um, dispelling some of the stuff that was in
Hmm.
that's been like maybe some rumors or things that aren't factual, and to kind of go granular on why some things ended up the way they were, and to also just put some information out there that people didn't even know about that wasn't in Masters
Hmm.
of Doom.
Hmm. Well, what was the real motivation for what? I mean, is there any particular stories? I mean, I'm sure there's a lot of stories in the book, but are there any few that kind of really was the driver behind, getting this out there?
Um, I don't think there's not a specific driver other than there's been some other really cool stuff that I've worked on and have done that I think people didn't know about,
Hmm.
that they'd be surprised about
Hmm.
reading the
Hmm.
book. Such as a Facebook game that I had made when there was a gold rush in the social bubble.
Hmm.
Um, that was really interesting. I worked on an MMO for 4.5 years, which is a pretty substantial piece of time, and that was like most people don't know about that.
Hmm.
Um, and I wanted to also just tell the stories of some of those pivotal things that happened from my own viewpoint and from
Hmm.
what I know.
Hmm.
Um, and I think one of the things about this book that was important to kind of get out there is that this isn't a tell-all, and um there's no revenge, there's no retribution. This is a very positive book. I'm
Hmm.
really grateful to have been able to make games this long,
Hmm.
and it's the journey has been incredible. And anything that happened along the way, I have no resentment towards anybody for anything.
Hmm.
And there's a lot of things that happen when we're young kids, and like you're kids, you make mistakes. Everybody makes mistakes. So this was a very positive book, and I think everybody, when they see themselves in the book, are gonna feel pretty good about it. And some of anything that would have been maybe that I thought that maybe somebody, if I'm writing about a certain situation that happened in the past, I would send the writing to that person to see what they felt about it,
Hmm.
and then correct things or reword things if they needed to, if they felt like they wanted it reworded a little bit. So this is a very open book, and it was there's no this is all a positive journey, which I think people really like to read. Books like that. And there's no mudslinging and name calling or anything like
Hmm.
that.
How did you discover your passion for video game? Decide that you wanted to become a video game programmer. Tell me how that came about.
It's funny because it was an accident. Um, I was so addicted to arcade games in
Mm.
the 70s,
Mm.
and you know, I lived in arcades, and back then, pre 1980, the games were just barely starting to get really interesting.
Hmm.
1978 was Space Invaders. Like that's
Hmm.
how early things were.
Hmm.
Um, I played tons of arcade games, but when you're a kid, and I was in 1979, I was 11 years old.
Hmm.
You need money to play games. It's 25 cents per game, right? And so I needed to have a job, and it just like it does, it drains a lot of money. One day my friend and my brother came to the house and they said, "You won't believe it. We found a way to play games that don't cost any money."
Uh-huh.
And I'm like, I want to go right now. Let's go. So I jumped on my bike. We all rode our bikes. I'm following them.
Uh-huh.
They ride their bikes up to Sierra College, which is the local college in town in Rockland.
Uh-huh.
And we go inside the computer lab. And it's there's almost no one in the computer lab because it's summertime. This is like,
Yeah.
summer break. So we go in, there's a couple, students in there, but there's like 25 terminals in a room, mostly empty. And in the next room is a giant mainframe filling the
Okay.
whole room.
Uh-huh.
And so my friend sits down. We sit down next to on a terminal, and we get into the terminal because he had somebody's accountant password that he knew. And he started saying, here are these games. Let me show you one. And it was like he showed me Hunt the Wumpus. He showed me Nim and Poison Cookie and Adventure, Colossal Cave Adventure. And he was basically showing me these games, and each one, and they're all turn-based games.
Uh-huh.
And so you can like think and take your time. And that was so different than arcade games.
Right.
Those games want your money, and it's real time, and you're dead. And
Right.
so, this was interesting, and in a very different kind of game design. And to me, it really opened up like, wow, games are a lot more than just those arcade games.
Mm.
And and then at some point, I was like, what are they doing? What are these other students doing? And he said, well, they're programming. Like they could make these games. They're like they're typing in the computer, the different words that it takes to make these things. I'm like, I want to know how to do that. I want to make some. So I started going to the to the students and asking them, what words can you show me what you're typing? And I was writing down print, go to, clear, all of the different things that they were writing on the screen. And then I would go over to the other terminal I was on and try making a program and just start trying to learn a little bit more, ask them a question until
Mm.
finally they gave me a book that had everything in it. It was HP Basic. So I got then I really started writing, learning really fast, and started making up just really simple games. Just I'm trying to make a room in an adventure to like show what to write on the screen what the description of the room is, and to be able to give a command to go to a different room. Just real basic stuff. But that was the key to like get that iterative development was happening already just naturally.
Huh.
And I get information, new knowledge, I use it, I see what it looks like instantly, and then I use it again. And so that was like I got the programming bug immediately in 79. And what's funny is when you look at it from a practical standpoint, you go, okay, so an 11-year-old went and taught themselves how to code in a computer lab at a university.
Right.
That's how you started. Okay.
So, what was the first game that you actually published, or was actually published in any kind of commercial way? Because I'm assuming these games are just you played with friends or whatever. But what was the first
Yep.
game that you was actually published?
The first one that was published, that's a game, not my first published thing, but my first published game,
Yeah.
is called Scout Search. And it was published in the June 1984 issue of Insider magazine. That's INCIDER.
Hmm.
And back then in the 80s, they would publish listings of programs in magazines that people at home would type those in on their computers. And then most of the time there's an error in typing and it doesn't run, and they got to figure out why it's not running.
Yeah. Right.
But what a nightmare. But that was the 80s. So people did that. And so my first program was a very short program, but it was a game called Scout Search. I got $100 for it. and it was exactly classic my design. You're a scout master, and you're trying to gather up your scouts who are in a maze, and you're trying to get them before the grizzly bear eats all of them.
Funny.
And so whenever a grizzly bear hit one of your scouts, it made a really loud pitched scream, and then they disappeared.
And what computer was this game played on? Like the Apple II or something like that? Or?
Yes, it was
Yeah,
on an Apple II.
yeah,
Yeah, it was on a 2
yeah.
Plus.
Interesting. So what was the first game that was published out as a executable game where you actually played it? When was that? What was the first game that was?
I'd say in 1987 was when a lot of my stuff was published on discs, and for people to run. In a bunch of those games, I wrote in '83, and eventually in 4 years they finally got published, which is kind of funny. But I did so much coding back in '83, '84, '85. Even though I was in high school, I was spending all my time programming, even in class, on paper. So I'd say '87 was the year of a lot of published stuff beginning to come out. Even if I wrote it years earlier, I was submitting like crazy, but finally got to the point where stuff was coming out. And I'd say I made a game in December of 1984 that was called Subnodule. It's a perfect '80s name. That game was published by a company called Key Punch Software up in Minneapolis, and it was on disc, and it was in all stores. It was in like B. Dalton booksellers and like all these all these other places where you could find software on discs, yeah, so and for some reason they called the game Sub Hunt on the back of the box. I was one of 4 games they were selling on a disc. They called it Sub Hunt, but when you ran the disc, it said Subnodule on it. And the game was my game Subnodule. It's weird marketing tactics, I guess.
Because you're just a kid at this point, how did you convince a publisher to publish your game? Like, did they look at you and say you're a high school kid? I mean, how did you convince the first publisher to publish a game for yours?
So I was when I was a teenager, I was really forward when I was writing letters to everybody. And so I wrote a lot of letters about my games to submit to a lot of places. So it wasn't like I just sent a letter to one place. I sent it to like 10 places with my discs and everything. And I basically told them this game is so great, and I just like gave them all the information about it. And even like at the end of the letters would say John Romero, ace programmer. and so I sent them all over the place. And the thing is, back then, I'd say starting, I don't remember when the first year was that this book came out, but there was a book called Programmer's Market, like 1981. Programmer's Market 82, 83, whatever, right? So I had this Programmer's Market book, and you always want the latest because this book has every publisher and their addresses and their phone numbers. So you could send letters to them because there was no internet, right?
Yeah,
there was no
right.
electronic anything. It was like, you basically would send your letters and your discs and everything. So I was basically going through these books, and I knew which publishers I was interested in, but then sometimes it was like, oh, I went to the store for a book and I saw that they sold software. Who is this? Key Punch. I'm going to sell it. The address is right there, so I will send it to them, and I will send it to these other guys. And so back then it was just like shotgun, just send stuff everywhere. And I had lots of rejection slips coming back. But for my earliest stuff, it was like garbage. But I had to get through all that period at the very beginning before I could actually start selling things. I was figuring out what quality was, at that time.
So how much did that first game that you published, how much did they pay you to acquire the rights for that game? Or how did that, do you remember?
I think it was probably $750.
Okay. Which
Yeah.
I'm sure at the time seemed like a lot of money or something.
Well, yeah, when you're not making hardly any money, it's really good.
So what game was your first kind of, let's say, breakout hit that really took off in any kind of meaningful way, would you say?
In the 80s there wasn't really anything that I did that was really big, because when I started getting to the point where I was really starting to publish,
Yeah.
that 8-bit industry was dying. So I couldn't have a hit. Um, I tried, like I lived the computer. I lived everything in the 80s. I mean, I lived in arcades. I played everything that came out for at least the first 6 years or so of the 80s. I went to every arcade.
Mm.
Um, I had everything on computers, on an Apple II computer. I had every game there, and I had also experienced games on Commodores and Atari 800s as well. So I was all game all the time, and I was following the best games that were out, like Choplifter and Load Runner
Mm.
and you name it. Like all of the hot games that were out, I played all of them. I loved them, and I wanted to make a game that was that quality. So I
Mhm.
always followed Broderbund and Sierra and
Mm.
Sirius Software, and those companies had the highest quality games. And so I was trying to do that. It's really hard though when you're in school for most of the day and you have to pay attention to school, And so that really, to me, it was funny because it's just like you're in school, you're supposed to do that to be a functional human in the world.
Yeah.
But I knew what I wanted to do already. And that's all I cared about. So I felt like I was really wasting a lot of time in school, but I would come home and I am on the computer. But those people who were writing those games, they were on the computer all the time,
Yeah. Right.
and they were, they spent a lot of time on those games. They spent sometimes a year on Choplifter or Load Runner. I was spending weeks on my games. I would get through a game and get it done, and boom, start on the next game. I wrote dozens of games back in those 80s.
Mm.
And I felt I was always trying to catch that one point where I was doing, really good work. And I did get to the point at the very end of the 80s where I was doing stuff at that really great level, but the industry had just died. And so it died in 89. And at that point, I had to switch to the PC. And I felt like tried so hard. I did as much as I could. I was in school for half of the 80s, full time at school, and I tried so hard to like make really good games, but like the industry died on me, and I have to start over again on a PC. And I was just like, I will start again on the PC. I'll do this again. I will start over. But I know a lot already. So I got a job at Softdisk in 1989 in March, and I got it's funny. It's in the book. It's nutty. I basically just called up this company called Softdisk because I knew a friend of mine was going there for an interview. I called them up and I just said, I want to talk to the president. And so he got on the phone and I said, hi, my name's John Romero. And he's like, oh, yeah, I've heard about you. And it's like, whoa,
Interesting.
that's cool. It's because my friend was already there talking to him. And so I just said, I would really love to get a job there, but I want to learn how to program a PC. I already know the Apple, but I need to learn the PC. And so he's like, okay, yeah, no problem. I'll hire you and you come on in, learn the PC, and start making stuff. I was like, when does that happen?
Yeah,
That's so
man.
lucky.
That's so
Um, but
funny.
but that's what I did. I switched over to the PC, and it was only, um, within a year and a half that I made the best thing in my career. You know,
Which was.
Commander Keen, the first
Oh,
Commander Keen games.
gotcha. What was the biggest game you programmed on the Apple II? Because I remember playing the Apple II through my high school days also. What was the biggest game that you actually wrote for that?
Probably Dangerous Dave, which
Okay.
was like a Mario style game.
Okay.
So it had 10 levels. It was really difficult. It's what you would call now, it's a Masocore, Masocore,
Uh-huh,
which means
uh-huh,
it's just incredibly difficult.
uh-huh.
Like Super Hexagon. If you've ever played the game Super Hexagon, that is a classic Masocore game. Dangerous Dave is also a Masocore game. Get past level 3 if you can. It's really hard.
So did you decide at some point consciously that you wanted to become a video programmer as your profession, or it just kind of just was a natural evolution where you were just doing it more and more and more, and like there's just nothing else you'd ever consider, or did you have to make some conscious decision on like this is what I want to make my career?
I knew that's what I wanted to do. I just
Okay.
didn't know how to go about doing it exactly, other than what I was doing, which was getting better and better at programming and making more and more games, dozens and dozens of games.
Mm.
That was training. And but I knew, like, at some point, like, I need to get hired somewhere, but I need to also, like, look for a job at a game company. Like, I'd just been submitting stuff, so I had to, like, at some point in my mind, go, I need to actually go look for a game in the game industry. So I did that in 1987. The very last Apple Fest was happening, and that's a show that Apple, I think Apple had been putting it on for several years. It was a really big show, and it was at Moscone Center in San Francisco. So I went to that show with a box of discs, and I was going to go get a job. And I got 3 job offers, basically, or 3 job leads. You know, like, one was a direct job offer and 2 really strong leads. And the one I really cared about was Origin Systems, because they made my favorite games, the Ultima series.
I remember those, yeah.
And that's where my first job was. I had to go through a really, really fun process to get hired there. But I did get hired there, and it was really, really cool. That was my first industry job in 1987.
How do you come up with a game? I mean, it strikes me it's kind of a weird confluence of, obviously there's game and there's, I mean, how do you just start programming and then the game comes to you? Do you come up with an idea and then start programming? How is it iterative? How does it happen?
It is really, a game is, when you're coming up with a game, it depends on the circumstance and the situation. If you're hired by somebody to do a game, there's a specific way you go about developing that idea. But if you're going to come up with something on your own, the ideas are coming from wants that you have personally, and influences usually come, and the influences on those ideas usually come from media that you're currently, viewing or reading or listening to. And a lot of times those tie in, or even games, like, you might be playing games and just like, it would be so cool to have this part of this game in this other style of game, and then, it's really a lot of thought. To do a game nowadays requires, it depends on how big it is, because, indie games can be made by one person,
Yeah.
and they can take all the chances they want, because they're making it in their own time, so it doesn't really cost them anything except time, like no money. And so you can just come up with these really cool ideas and just start making it, yourself. But if you want to, like, get money from an investor or a publisher, you have to really come up with a lot of documentation and a lot of proof that this is a good idea. And to do that, you do need to have a lot of good references, market references for things that are already out, and how well they're doing, and how your idea plus ones that and makes it even better. So it's so much work creating those presentations and all of the spreadsheets and everything that goes into shopping a game. But when it gets picked up, it's gone through a lot of revision too. Like, your initial idea is not the same thing that you're going to start building, because things change in the game industry constantly, even while you're trying to develop and pitch an idea.
How about today? Do you still really, really like writing video games, or has it started to where you are looking to do other things now, or you still really enjoy it just as much as when you were 11-year-old kid?
Yeah, I love it. I
Yeah.
love it. I do it every day. It's
Yeah.
super, super fun.
What was the experience of writing this book like? I mean, obviously that's very different from doing a video game. And was it something that, was it using a different muscle in your mind in a way? Like, well, tell me a little bit about that.
It was not, it was not difficult, because I remember everything, like, that goes in the book, that went into the book. And so it was a lot of, like, how do I want to tell it, what's going to go in it, what shouldn't go in it.
Yeah.
And it took a long time. It was like, it took a year, something like that. But it was a lot of just, like, in what's important about this story, and how should it be told. And also, I wanted to make sure that the voice in the story that you read doesn't read like, there are some memoirs that I've read from people who are just, like, in metal, or rock and roll or whatever, and it sounds like it just sounds like they're talking, like it sounds the way that they talk. And sometimes it's not as poignant or reflectory as you would think or you would hope for. So I wanted to make sure that this book had a lot of reflection in it. It was not off the cuff. It was really considered. Everything was considered, and that it was reviewed multiple times, and like, let's add this in or let's take this out because it doesn't matter, or like, let's not waste words because there was actually more stories than would fit in the book.
Yeah, I'm sure. I'm sure.
There's a certain page count you can't go beyond.
Well, did you have a lot of notes and stuff like that? Did you keep a lot of notes, or did you literally, this is all from memory, or did you have a lot of notes?
I do have a lot of notes. I actually, from when I don't, this is nuts, but like from when I was a teenager, everything that I have drawn or written or anything, I've saved every piece of paper. Listings of software, like when you were asking me when was your first game sold, which was in 1984, I have games from 1982 all the way up. I've saved every single game. So even games that were on diskettes for the Apple II computer, I have those running on my computer from 1982 on forward. So I've saved everything, all the paper, all the discs, all the games, source code, you name it. I've kept it, and it's funny because I think a lot of people, to me, it felt just natural. Like I'm a collector of stuff. I used to collect TV guides. I used to collect comic strips. I collect comic books. So yeah, so I've collected a lot of stuff, and I just like, why wouldn't I collect my own stuff that I make? It just like seemed natural to me. But I also collect stories, and I collect like anything that is interesting to me. But then at some point, later I found that a lot of people just throw away things. They just don't care. They're just like burning stuff or just like tossing it in the trash, or not getting upset if their mom throws it out, and just things like that. So yeah, so I knew that I was kind of different in that way, but I knew that other people collected too. So I didn't think I was like really totally different.
Yeah, I'm imagining all the stuff all the computer stuff and all these discs. It takes up a lot of space now. Or does it take a like big room? You have a big room just of all the stuff that you've ever written.
Yeah, we call it the archive.
Well, what was the experience? I mean, it sounds like you actually had a lot of fun writing this book. Most people find writing a book an incredible amount of work and very tedious, but it sounds like you kind of had a lot of fun. Is that what you'd say?
Yeah, it was fun because it was just trying to get the stories right, and like the amount of dialogue versus description. Like there's like, when am I going to say like, oh, here's what it went like, here's what it was like when we were talking about this thing, and there's like just dialogue that out.
Yeah.
And then it's like, okay, now give a bunch more information in like a paragraph or two paragraphs that we don't want to dialogue out, like put that in there, and then go back into that. So it's fun to kind of go in between which one or where are we going, like. So yeah, there's a lot of that. There's a lot of like, how do we set it up? How do we set up a story? How do we reflect on a thing that happened? Great thing, because so much stuff happened. I feel that like since I started learning how to program, I've been on this rocket going up. And in a lot of it's all exciting stuff, and so it's really fun to like go through the book and just keep on. It's like the level just keeps on going up and up, and the level just keeps going better and better, and it's really fun to figure out how to make that sound like it's the next interesting transition point.
Yeah. Well, now that the book is done, I know it's going to be published here very shortly. Are you just back to video game programming, or are you on to yet a different third project?
Yeah, so there's a game idea that I had and developed, and kind of got the development of the idea finished around in 2019, and shopped it for years, actually, for probably another 2.5 years, and finally got picked up by a major publisher, and we started working a little over a year ago on this. So the teams, we've been gradually hiring people. So the team is in the mid 30s, something like that, 30-something people. And we're growing the team. We're continually growing because we're on a a ramp, a hiring ramp that we're trying to bring great people into the company. So yeah, we've been working on this game. It's a really great idea. To get a major publisher interested, you have to really tick a lot of boxes for things that are happening now and what might happen in the future.
Yeah.
And then it's all about the execution. It's all about making it great and really finding the fun and continually holding on to that.
Did you put that project on hold while you were writing the book, or you did both of those simultaneously?
Simultaneously.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, it was like the book was like a nighttime thing.
But now that the book's done, you're full time on that video game.
Yeah. There's I mean, the thing is, we're trying, we don't want people to burn out and work too much or whatever. So I just have more time after work that's not focused on writing a book, working on a book, but I do work on other things too, So yeah, I'm always doing something.
When you wrote the book, did it feel like there was enough stuff that you didn't include that might be there for a second book, or you think you pretty much got everything you wanted in this book, or do you think that it's a possibility you actually might do a second book at some point?
I think I got everything in this book. I think there's so much stuff in this book that if I wrote another book, it would be really, really different. Like it would go into detail. It wouldn't be an autobiography, it would be something that like it's autobiographical in a certain way, but like I could go into detail on each of my games and kind of talk about the source code and the way it was written and in my thought process while making the book, because I only have so much space to write about things in the autobiography going over a whole life. But on these games, I could just like zero into a game and talk about that one specific thing, put as much detail as I can. It's like cataloging everything that I know about each of my games and then moving on to the next game. And like that would be really the only other book that I could see about writing until I stop making games. Then maybe I'll come up with a bunch of other ideas.
Well, John, I really appreciate talking to the time you took. It's such an honor to talk to a legend. I grew up on the Apple II computer, so I've known your name forever. And I can't wait to read the book. If you decide to do something else later in the future, please come back and tell me about it.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks for having me. It's been great.
This is Richard Hsu and John Romero. Thanks.